It was time, really. The reason all of us in the Beatles shied away from Beatles material directly after the breakup.
It's kind of between me and Paul. It was always that competition, a friendly competition still, you know. Can you come up with something, or can I come?
In 2020, Paul McCartney reignited one of rock's most enduring rivalries when he casually called the Rolling Stones a blues cover band. The comment wasn't made during a drunken pub rant or buried in an obscure interview. It was a deliberate jab during a New Yorker profile. Mick Jagger responded on stage just days later, sarcastically calling the Beatles a fantastic band that never toured an arena. Though fans chalk it up to friendly fire, McCartney's disdain wasn't new. He's long considered the Beatles the more innovative group, citing their boundary-pushing approach compared to the Stones' reliance on blues roots. The insult cut deep for a reason. McCartney saw the Stones as followers, not leaders. And coming from one of the most polite men in rock history, calling your lifelong competitors a cover band is like throwing down a velvet gauntlet. In the height of 1990s Britpop arrogance, Noel Gallagher loudly claimed that Oasis was bigger than the Beatles. It was classic Oasis, swagger over substance. But for Paul McCartney, it crossed a line. He waited a few years before responding, and when he did, it was scalpel sharp. "They're derivative," he said in an interview. "They mean nothing to me." Those words weren't shouted, they were whispered, like a mafia don issuing a death sentence. McCartney wasn't just reacting to Oasis' ego. He saw them as opportunists riding the Beatles' coattails without offering anything new. Even their melodies and album art borrowed heavily from Beatles-era styles. To Paul, that wasn't homage, it was mimicry. And while Oasis crumbled under its own weight, Paul's subtle contempt endured. He never needed to discredit them. One sentence was enough. In 1978, the Bee Gees starred in a cinematic catastrophe, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, a film adaptation of the Beatles' landmark album. McCartney had nothing to do with it, and wanted nothing to do with it. Before it even released, he warned that the concept was flawed. After watching the result, his feelings only hardened. In later interviews, he called the film a mistake and said the idea of turning a concept album into a full-blown movie could never work. Privately, he was even more dismissive. According to insiders, McCartney felt the Bee Gees had not only failed to capture the Beatles' spirit, they cheapened it. The visuals were bizarre, the acting wooden, and the reverence non-existent. It wasn't just a flop, it was an insult. McCartney has expressed admiration for Led Zeppelin's thunderous sound, once calling John Bonham a monster on drums. But when the legendary band reunited in 2007 for a one-off show at London's O2 Arena, without Robert Plant, Paul wasn't impressed. In a later interview, he praised their musicianship, but added that, without Plant, it just wasn't the same. It might seem like a mild critique, but in the world of rock royalty, that's a loaded statement. McCartney knows better than anyone how crucial chemistry is to a band's identity. After all, the Beatles never attempted a real reunion without John Lennon. To him, calling it a Zeppelin reunion without Plant was misleading, almost disrespectful. He admired the effort, but the soul was missing. And that's where he drew the line. At first glance, Paul McCartney and Phil Collins seemed like they'd get along fine. Two British music legends who reshaped pop and rock in their own ways. But in 2002, at Queen Elizabeth II's Golden Jubilee, Collins experienced a moment that changed his view of McCartney forever. Collins, excited to meet one of his idols, brought along a Beatles biography to be signed. According to Collins, McCartney glanced at the book and mocked him. "Oh, you've brought this for me to sign, have you?" In a voice Collins described as superior and condescending. Phil wasn't amused. He later recounted the story in interviews and admitted he'd never really liked him after that. And McCartney? He stayed silent, never denying it. That wasn't just a brush-off, it was a public frostbite. McCartney didn't just reject the autograph. He stripped away the fan artist illusion, and in doing so, bruised a fellow rock legend's ego. In a curious twist of ego and artistry, Paul McCartney once tried to get himself onto one of the greatest albums of all time, Dark Side of the Moon. During the production of the 1973 classic, Pink Floyd gathered soundbites from various celebrities and acquaintances to layer into their tracks. McCartney, always keen to stay in the experimental conversation, offered a recording of himself doing one of his famous, zany characters. But Roger Waters was not impressed. Waters later explained that McCartney's contribution was rejected for being too performative. In other words, Paul was trying too hard. It stung. Not because McCartney needed the spotlight, but because he wasn't used to being left on the cutting room floor. The rejection was never forgotten. Though the bands existed in the same orbit, McCartney never publicly praised Floyd with the same enthusiasm he reserved for others. That absence, telling. Paul McCartney isn't shy about his admiration for Bruce Springsteen's energy. But admiration doesn't mean agreement. In a 2023 appearance on Conan O'Brien's podcast, McCartney recounted how he once jokingly told Bruce, "It's your fault. Man, people do 3-hour shows now because of you." Though said with a smile, there was a sting to it. McCartney, now in his 80s, often plays for over 2 hours, but he's admitted he thinks some modern concerts overstay their welcome. He noted that bands try to compete by pushing set lists longer and longer, something he indirectly blamed on the boss. The critique wasn't hostile, but it revealed McCartney's belief in discipline, pacing, and polish over endurance marathons. It's the difference between a tightly written Beatles track and a 12-minute jam session. This one cut deeper than any interview dig or offhand remark, because it cost McCartney actual ownership of his own songs. In the early 1980s, Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson were close collaborators, recording hits like Say 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 and The Girl Is Mine. McCartney even gave Jackson a casual tip about investing in publishing rights. That's where the real money is. Then in 1985, Jackson shocked McCartney by buying ATV Music, the company that held the publishing rights to most Beatles songs, for $47.5 million. Paul was stunned. He assumed Jackson would have given him a chance to co-own or opt out. Instead, Jackson outbid everyone, including McCartney. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't personal, at least not to Jackson. But to Paul, it felt like betrayal. He later said, "I thought he'd treat me fairly, but he didn't." Their friendship never recovered. In 2012, Paul McCartney surprised fans by performing with the surviving members of Nirvana, Dave Grohl, Chris Novoselic, and Pat Smear, for a one-off song titled "Cut Me Some Slack." It was a powerful tribute, a grunge meets Beatle moment that made headlines. But what seemed like camaraderie on stage came with a hint of condescension behind the scenes. In multiple interviews afterward, McCartney emphasized that he didn't really know who Nirvana was before the collaboration and admitted he thought they were just another grunge band from the 90s. To Gen X fans and rock historians, that was tone-deaf. Nirvana wasn't just another band. They revolutionized an era. McCartney's dismissiveness didn't come from hatred, but from disinterest. And in the world of rock, being ignored by a legend can sting more than being insulted. So, what does this list reveal about Paul McCartney? Underneath the charm and legendary status lies a fiercely competitive artist who guards his legacy with silent ferocity. From subtle snubs to outright disdain, these rivalries weren't just about ego. They were about artistic integrity, control, and staying on top of a mountain he helped build. But here's the twist. Most of these feuds weren't loud. They were whispered, shrugged, or shrugged off. And that's what makes them even more fascinating. Subscribe now and make sure you don't miss what's coming.